200 Apache warriors do not appear at your remote cabin by chance. They ride for vengeance, for honor, or for war. And Silas Cole Tanner was about to discover which of the three had brought them to his door. But let's go back to the beginning. 48 hours before the impending confrontation, the relentless Sierra Nevada sun beat down on Cole's solitary claim, a small, hard-won piece of land tucked between jagged, unforgiving peaks. He was patiently panning for gold in the icy stream when his gaze fell upon a small figure limping along the far bank. At 40 years old, Cole had witnessed plenty of hardship and more than his share of trouble, but there was something about this particular afternoon that felt profoundly different, unsettling, and wrong. A child, no older than 10, was struggling with each step as she moved with a desperate weaving motion toward the water source. Her clothes were worn and torn, a simple buckskin garment that had been through too much, and even from a distance, Cole could see the way hunger and exhaustion made each step a monumental struggle. The child was a young girl, her dark eyes too wide for her thin face, her lips cracked from dehydration. She spoke in a rapid, unfamiliar tongue, but her meaning was universally clear. She was starving, and her small hands gestured toward her mouth and then to the creek, a language of pure need that transcended all cultural barriers. Most prospectors in these parts would have instinctively reached for their rifle first and asked questions later. The relationship between the miners and the local Apache tribes had been tense for years, with small raids and retaliatory attacks keeping everyone in a state of constant unease. But Cole had always been different, maybe too different for his own good. He put down his gold pan, his movements deliberate and slow, and walked toward the child with his hands visible. As he got closer, he saw a deep, crudely bandaged gash on her calf, the makeshift wrap caked with dried dirt and blood. The girl's face was a mask of pain and profound exhaustion. Cole knelt, offering a hand. She shrank away for a moment, but the raw need for help was stronger than her fear. Without another thought, Cole scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing, and as he carried her toward his cabin, he could feel her tiny body trembling, a tremor born of fear and hunger. Inside his modest cabin, Cole gently laid her on his only bunk, a simple cot covered with a heavy wool blanket. He moved quickly to tend to her wound. He had a small medical kit from his time as a medic in the army, and he carefully cleaned the cut with a potent splash of whiskey before bandaging it properly. After that, he prepared some of his leftover venison stew, still warm on the stove from the previous night, and a piece of fresh cornbread. The smell of the food seemed to revive the girl slightly, and for the first time he saw something that might have been hope flicker in her eyes. As he handed her the bowl, he noticed a distinctive armlet on her wrist. The intricate beadwork, with patterns of thunderbirds and arrows, was a pattern Cole knew was the sacred mark of the Chief Red Eagle's daughter. Cole's hand froze mid-air. He wasn't just helping a lost child. He was harboring the heir of the most powerful tribal leader in the region. It was too late to turn back now. The girl was already reaching for the food with shaking hands, and Cole couldn't bring himself to deny her. He handed her the bowl and watched as she ate with the desperate hunger of someone who hadn't seen food in days. What Cole didn't know was that 40 miles away, a large Apache search party had just found the girl's trail leading directly toward his claim, and Chief Red Eagle himself was riding at the head of that party, his face a mask of grief and fury that promised nothing but trouble for whoever had taken his daughter. The girl finished eating and looked up at Cole with a mixture of relief and gratitude, but as the afternoon shadows lengthened across his property, Cole couldn't shake the growing feeling that he'd just made either the best decision of his life or the very last one he'd ever make. The girl fell into a deep sleep on his bunk within the hour, utter exhaustion finally overtaking her small body. Cole covered her with a blanket and tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing, but as evening approached, that conviction started to crumble under the weight of his fear. The sound of distant hoofbeats on the hard-packed earth made his stomach drop. Cole peered through his window and saw his neighbor Silas Boone, riding hard toward his cabin with Deputy Ben Carter. Cole stepped outside before they could dismount, hoping to keep their voices down and avoid waking the girl, but Boone was already shouting before his horse came to a full stop. "Cole, what in the devil are you doing?" "Carter says they're signaling from the peaks. The tribe is looking for something, or someone." Carter nodded grimly. "Chief Red Eagle's daughter went missing. You wouldn't know anything about a missing girl, would you?" Core's throat went dry. The smart thing would be to lie, to send them away, and figure this out on his own. For these men had been his neighbors for years. "She's inside," Cole said quietly. She was wounded and exhausted. I couldn't just leave her to die. The silence that followed was deafening. Son, do you have any idea what you've done? Boone asked, his voice barely a whisper. I helped a hungry child, Cole replied. But even as he said it, he could hear how naive it sounded. Carter was already backing his horse away. I have to report this, Cole. It's my duty, but I'll give you a head start. Get her back to her people before they find you here. In the mountains in the dark, she can barely walk, and how am I supposed to approach a war party without getting shot full of arrows? That's your problem now, Carter said, mounting his horse. I'm going to warn the others. If Red Eagle decides to make an example of you, he might not stop at just your claim. As the men rode away, Cole stood alone in the growing darkness, listening to the girl's quiet breathing from inside the cabin. He knew there was no good way out of this. Every option led to the same place, a confrontation with one of the most feared chiefs in the territory. As if summoned by his thoughts, a new sound drifted across the wind. A deep, resonant war chant, growing closer with each passing minute. Cole's blood ran cold. They weren't waiting for morning. The Apache were coming tonight. Cole rushed back into the cabin, his mind racing. The chant was getting louder, a slow, methodical rhythm that was absolutely terrifying. This wasn't the chaotic noise of a small raiding party. This was something far more organized and infinitely more dangerous. The girl stirred in the bunk, awakened by the sound of the chant. Her eyes opened wide, and for the first time, Cole saw recognition cross her face. She understood what those chants meant better than he did. She spoke rapidly, pointing toward the door, and then at herself. Even without understanding the words, Cole could see the panic in her movements. She was trying to warn him about something, but the language barrier made communication impossible. Cole knelt beside her bunk, speaking as calmly as he could manage. I know you can't understand me, little one, but I'm trying to help you. Those chants, that's your people coming for you, isn't it? The girl nodded vigorously, then grabbed Cole's sleeve and held up both hands, opening and closing her fingers repeatedly. Cole counted along with her movements. 10, 20, 30. She kept going until she'd counted to what looked like 200. Cole's legs went weak. 200 warriors. He'd been hoping for maybe a dozen angry braves that he could somehow reason with. But 200, that was enough to level every claim for 100 miles. The chant stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been. Cole moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. At first he saw nothing. Then, like ghosts materializing from the night itself, he began to make out shapes moving across his property. They came in a perfect formation. Warriors on horseback spread out in a wide semicircle that was slowly tightening around his cabin. Even in the moonlight, Cole could see the war paint on their faces, the feathers in their hair, the weapons in their hands. These weren't men who had come to negotiate. The girl tugged on Cole's sleeve again, this time gesturing toward herself, and then toward the door. She wanted to go to them, but Cole couldn't tell if that would help or make everything worse. What if they thought he'd hurt her? What if they didn't believe she'd come to him willingly? A single voice called out from the darkness, speaking in English with a heavy accent but perfect clarity. White man, we know you have taken something that belongs to us. Send out the girl and perhaps you will live to see the dawn. The voice carried absolute authority. It was Chief Red Eagle himself. Cole had heard stories about the man, how he'd united several tribes under his leadership, how he'd never lost a battle against the cavalry, and now Cole was about to face him. The girl grabbed his arm with surprising strength. She shook her head frantically and pointed to herself, then made a gesture across her throat. She was trying to warn him. She wasn't just the chief's daughter. She was the chief's only daughter. In her tribe's culture, that made her invaluable, not just as family, but as the future of the bloodline. If anything had happened to her while in Cole's care, even if it wasn't his fault, Red Eagle would have no choice but to make a brutal example of him that other prospectors would never forget. Cole realized with growing horror that saving the girl's life might have been the easy part. Now he had to prove to 200 armed warriors that he'd saved her, not stolen her. And he had about 30 seconds to figure out how to do that before Chief Red Eagle lost his patience and turned Cole's claim into a battlefield. Cole made the hardest decision of his life. He opened the cabin door and stepped outside with his hands raised high. The girl followed closely behind him. The sight that greeted him was something straight out of his worst nightmares. 200 warriors sat motionless on their horses, forming a perfect circle around his property. War paint gleamed in the moonlight, and every weapon was pointed directly at him. At the front of the formation sat a man who could only be Chief Red Eagle, massive, imposing, with eyes that seemed to burn with barely contained fury. The girl ran toward her father, calling out in her native tongue. Instead of the joyful reunion Cole expected, Red Eagle's expression grew even darker. The chief dismounted and knelt beside his daughter, examining her carefully while she spoke rapidly, gesturing back toward Cole in the cabin. Cole couldn't understand the words, but he could read the chief's body language. Every muscle was coiled like a spring, ready to explode into violence. Whatever the girl was telling him, it wasn't making things better. Finally, Red Eagle stood and walked toward Cole with slow, deliberate steps. The other warriors remained mounted, but shifted their weapons, the subtle movement creating a sound like 100 rattlesnakes preparing to strike. "My daughter tells me you mended her wound," the chief said, his English precise and cold. "She tells me you gave her food. Yet you did not immediately return her to us." He stopped just outside arm's reach, close enough that Cole could see the intricate scars on the chief's chest, marks of countless battles won. "She was weak," Cole replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "I was going to bring her back in the morning. She was too hurt to travel at night." "Perhaps," Red Eagle said, "or perhaps you thought to keep her as a prize, to trade her back to us for gold or safe passage through our lands." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Cole felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on him. "That's not true," Cole said. "I didn't want anything. I just couldn't watch a child suffer." A warrior named Stonejaw stepped forward, his face a mask of rage, pointing his lance directly at Cole. "My warriors expect justice," the chief said. "You will prove your words, or you will die where you stand." Cole's mind raced. How do you prove kindness to a man who's seen nothing but evil from your kind? Then he remembered the scar on his leg. "She came to me with a wound," Cole said, pointing to the girl's calf. "I cleaned it and bandaged it. I bear my own scars, Chief. I know what a wound feels like." Cole pulled up his shirt, showing a long scar from his army days. "I helped her because I understood her pain." A flicker of understanding crossed the chief's face. The girl then spoke up, tugging on her father's arm. "She is telling them about the scar," Red Eagle translated. "She is saying you helped her because you understood her pain, not because you wanted to harm her." Stonejaw lowered his lance slightly, but his face still showed doubt. Red Eagle looked at Cole. "My daughter has just turned a war party into a council meeting, but now comes the hardest part. You must come to our village and prove to the elders that her faith in you was justified." The ride to the Apache village took 3 hours. It was a journey through hidden canyons and along secret paths that Cole had never seen before, a world entirely unknown to the white settlers. As they approached the camp, Cole could see dozens of fires flickering in the darkness and hear the low murmur of voices, a hum of anticipation that grew with their arrival. The tribal council convened immediately despite the late hour. 7 elders, their faces weathered and lined by a lifetime on the plains, sat in a semicircle around a central fire. Their expressions were grave in the dancing shadows, and Cole stood in the center, a lone figure in the midst of a culture he had only ever seen from a distance. He was acutely aware that he was probably the first white man to ever enter this sacred space and live to tell about it. Red Eagle spoke first, his voice calm but firm as he explained the circumstances of his daughter's rescue. He was followed by Stonejaw, who, despite his earlier change of heart at the cabin, still argued for the traditional way of justice. His words were filled with a fierce conviction, demanding retribution for a wrong he believed had been done. The debate went back and forth for what felt like hours, a rapid exchange of language Cole couldn't understand, except for the occasional angry gesture directed his way. Finally, the girl stepped forward again, her small frame radiating a newfound strength. This time her voice was calm and measured, but her words carried the weight of absolute conviction. She spoke for nearly 10 minutes, never once looking away from the elders' faces. She recounted her journey, her words painting a vivid picture of her desperation and the fear that had almost consumed her. She told them how Cole had cared for her wound and fed her, a testament to his kindness. She ended her plea by speaking of Cole's own wound, of the scar on his body that showed he too had known pain, and that his compassion was born from understanding, not a desire for gain. When she finished, The oldest member of the council, a wizened old woman with hair as white as snow, asked her a single question. Her answer was immediate and unwavering. Red Eagle turned to Cole, a glimmer of something that might have been respect in his eyes. She was asked if she truly believes you would risk your life to save an Apache child again, knowing what it might cost you. She said yes without hesitation. The elders conferred among themselves in low whispers. Cole's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat of its own, as he waited for their decision, knowing that these next few moments would determine whether he lived or died. The white-haired elder stood slowly, her joints creaking with age. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of decades of wisdom. He says, Red Eagle translated, that the spirits have sent us a test tonight. Not a test of our ability to make war, but our ability to recognize when mercy deserves mercy in return. You have passed this test. Cole felt his knees go weak with relief, but the elder wasn't finished. You will be granted safe passage back to your land. But more than that, you will be granted the protection of our tribe. Any Apache who harms you or your property will answer to this council, not to us, but to the spirits who watch over us all. Cole could barely speak. I don't know what to say. There is one condition, the elder continued. You must promise that if any of our people come to you in need, hungry, wounded, or lost, you will show them the same kindness you showed this child. I promise, Cole said without hesitation. What happened next surprised everyone. The girl ran to Cole and hugged him tightly, speaking in broken English for the first time. Thank you for saving me. Now I save you. As dawn broke, Cole rode back to his cabin with an escort of honor instead of a war party. The two cultures that had been on the brink of violence had instead found a bridge in the form of one prospector's simple act of kindness. Cole's claim became a neutral ground where prospectors and tribespeople could meet safely. He never got rich, never became famous, but he lived the rest of his life knowing that sometimes the smallest acts of mercy can prevent the greatest tragedies. And every year on the anniversary of that night, the young woman, no longer a starving child but a respected member of her tribe, would visit Cole to share a meal and remember the moment when two worlds chose understanding over warfare. The girl who had once begged for food became a translator and peacekeeper between the tribes and settlers. Cole lived to be 73, dying peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by friends from both cultures who had learned that courage isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about knowing when to help a hungry child instead. The West is full of stories. Some end in peace, others in blood. Join us, and you will hear them all.